Visualize a virus so deadly that it can kill as many as 90% of all individuals it infects, but so elusive that it persists for years and then re-emerges. A virus which is not airborne, but which can be transmitted by contact, body fluids, contaminated surfaces, and patient garments. A virus which has unnerved people, dismantled health infrastructure, and tested our understanding of infectious disease to the limits. That is the story of the Ebola virus. Ebola virus was first isolated in 1976 in two simultaneous epidemics in Central Africa, the Nzara district of Sudan and Yambuku village near the Ebola River in Democratic Republic of Congo. The virus was named to avoid stigmatizing the village. Initial epidemics were catastrophic with complete mortality and rapid transmission to intimate contacts. The capacity of the virus to induce acute hemorrhagic fever and rapid transmission created panic among the global health community. Ebola is a virus belonging to the family Filoviridae and comprising several species that infect human beings. One such highly virulent species includes the Zaire Ebola virus, and it has been responsible for the majority of the outbreaks and deaths. The virus is also zoonotic, and the virus's natural reservoir is fruit bats. The Ebola virus is spread from infected animals, such as bats and non-human primates, to human beings and indirect transmission between human beings by direct contact with infected body fluid. Ebola is associated with abrupt presentations and quick progression. After the incubation period of 2 to 21 days, the patient presents with acute onset of fever, muscle weakness, headache, sore throat, and muscle pain. The disease is followed by vomiting, diarrhea, rash, and internal and external hemorrhage in a few instances. Failure of multiple organs and death follow if early treatment does not take place. As the early signs are nonspecific, Ebola can be mistaken for other infectious diseases like malaria or typhoid fever, and therefore it is not diagnosed and controlled easily at the primary level. One of the most significant challenges in the management of Ebola outbreaks is the fact that there is no established treatment. Supportive care in the form of rehydration and relief of symptoms can facilitate survival, but no large-scale used antiviral drug has been licensed. Experimental drugs, such as monoclonal antibodies and antivirals, have shown promise through clinical trials, but are not available, especially in those with limited resources. Vaccination also has been enhanced in the last few years. RVESV-Zebov, developed as a vaccine during the West African Ebola outbreak of 2014 to 2016, was licensed and implemented in outbreak settings. The vaccine is extremely effective against preventing Ebola virus disease and is now considered part of outbreak readiness. The history of Ebola is one of determination, horror, and scientific progress. From its enigmatic origins in the rainforests of Africa to its current status as an international health threat, Ebola has led us to the edges of our preparedness and response. In these pages, we explore the history of the epidemics of Ebola in greater depth, the scientific advances of learning about the disease, and the efforts at preventing future epidemics now. In the decades since its discovery, the Ebola virus had been a remote and infrequent threat, lethal, to be certain, but limited to occasional outbreaks in remote villages. That, of course, was an illusion shattered in 2014. What had been a remote but feared virus suddenly became an overnight global crisis. Ebola ran uncontrolled in West Africa in 2014, and the world witnessed the biggest and deadliest outbreak man has ever known. It began quietly, almost secretly, in a small village in Guinea. A child fell ill with an illness in December 2013, and within a week or two, a few of his family members also fell ill. Local health officials did not know they had Ebola at first. It was imitating malaria or typhoid. But before it knew it, the virus had already infected its two neighbors, Liberia and Sierra Leone, nations with weak health systems, weak disease surveillance, and a history of war that eroded their institutions and left them at the bottom of the levels of trust in government. Unlike the earlier outbreaks, which were contained within a few days or weeks at best, this one went out of control. By mid-2014, the virus spread wildly in major cities. Physicians and health workers were killed in their hundreds. Clinics ran out of all protective equipment. Entire blocks were quarantined. Families were broken up, some too terrified to admit relatives to the hospital, others forced to secretly bury their dead because of strict government regulations. The most revolting aspect of this epidemic, maybe, was the way misinformation and cultural ceremony facilitated its spread. Washings and body contact during traditional funeral rites in most societies inadvertently spread the virus to others. Misconceptions that health workers were disease carriers in themselves led to brutal attacks on the doctors and humanitarian staff. In one horrific episode, the entire group of health educators were massacred in Guinea, merely for attempting to educate people about the facts of Ebola. It wasn't until the world outside responded that the tide slowly started to change. Organizations such as Medicine Sans Frontiers, Doctors Without Borders, initially sounded the alarm, but it was slow to come internationally. It wasn't until the World Health Organization finally labeled it a public health emergency of international concern that the world awakened. Field hospitals were established, contact tracing ramped up, and public health messages were culturally tailored. Military teams were deployed by the US and UK to construct treatment facilities. Journalists, politicians, and celebrities started discussing Ebola. It took an international panic before the world finally responded. By 2016, the epidemic was under control. But at what price? However, more than 28,000 infected and more than 11,000 dead. It had wrecked economies, torn families apart, and exposed the inability of the world to contain a fast-spreading viral outbreak. But even amidst that darkness, there were glimmers of hope. The crisis accelerated the race towards vaccine development, pushed global systems of outbreak response, and forced an overdue investment in the global health infrastructure. It was a call to wake up to infectious diseases, however remote their birth, to harm us all. In Step 2, we will learn about the science of the virus, how it acts, how it mutates, and how it bypasses the body's immune system, and why it is crucial that we learn about Ebola so we can avoid it. Let's go. In order to find out why Ebola is so lethal, you need to examine how Ebola acts once inside the human body. Unlike some of those viruses that do not waste any time getting embedded or showing with minimal symptoms, Ebola doesn't waste any time. It is in the body where it initiates its brutal attack on the immune system. It infects cells, specifically cells lining blood vessels as well as cells constituting the body's defense. And then, almost like a hijacker, it coerces such cells into copying it even more, fast and in large numbers. It only gets worse with the manner in which the virus blinds the body's defense. Normally, if we have a virus, our body alerts itself and sends out warning signals. Ebola eliminates the entire process of raising warnings. However, it suppresses interferons, the chemical messengers that trigger an immune response, so that the virus can infect without anyone noticing, similar to a burglar disarming an alarm system. In infecting, it begins to break down blood vessels, and they leak. That is when it hemorrhages, internally, externally, and likely both. Meanwhile, the virus triggers a huge inflammatory response, a cytokine storm, when the body begins attacking itself in a haze. Organs like the liver, kidneys, and heart begin to close down. For most patients, this is a turnkey operation. The illness can turn so rapidly that even with optimal medical care, they are not saved. But the death rate also varies based on the virus strain, general health, and availability of treatment. The patients can be saved with critical care and early intervention. But still, yet another frightening thing about Ebola is that it has a lasting impact. Even if one is saved, the virus might have a lasting impact in the testes or in the eyes. Months later, survivors can still suffer from complications such as inflammation of the eyes, or even be capable of transmitting the virus to other individuals by way of having intercourse. Its long-term effect defies the notion that if one remains alive, then one is safe, and if recurrences can still occur despite an outbreak having passed. Experts and doctors have devoted years trying to read Ebola. The virus itself is genetically simple, 7 genes tops, but its behavior is sneaky and relentless. Mutations can cause it to be more contagious, lethal, or undetectable. Scientists saw minimal variation in the genetic composition of the West African outbreak that might contribute to the spread of the virus. That's why one needs to be careful. Ebola is not a static target. It mutates, it changes, it evolves. There's also a human side to this science. Scientists have put their own lives at risk to experiment with the virus in biosafety level 4 laboratories, total containment labs, where scientists operate in full-body suits and sealed hoods. These are the foot soldiers in the fight against one of the most deadly germs on Earth. All this toil and sweat was worth it for the key discoveries: how the virus attaches to human cells, how antibodies inactivated, and how vaccines create immunity in anticipation of infection. In the last 2 years, gene-based treatments such as ZMapp, IgNB3, and MAB114 were created. These are antibody cocktails that put the kibosh on the disease, and they reduce death in some trials by a significant margin. But there are still obstacles: production, access, price, and acceptance by whoever must administer them the most. Here we will see how societies and nations have responded to the ongoing threat of Ebola, the moral challenges of treatment and quarantine, and what the world can, and must, learn in order not to repeat such deadly history. Now lesson. Although the world had witnessed the atrocities of the 2014 to 2016 West African outbreak, Ebola still did not vanish. It returned, again, in new waves, but this time mainly in the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC. But with a difference this time. Countries had learned their lesson. The virus was no longer the mysterious enemy. Instead, it was an old enemy, and governments and international health agencies had already begun making preparations to fight back more quickly and effectively. Rapid test kits were employed. Mobile labs were sent to remote villages. West Africa-trained emergency response teams were deployed within days, not months. Vaccination was on the playbook at that time. During the 2018 to 2020 outbreak in the DRC, health workers first applied the RVSV-Zebo vaccine in a real emergency setting to create ring vaccinations around confirmed cases. It was groundbreaking. Thousands of lives were preserved, and outbreaks that would have gotten out of control before were contained earlier. But none of these came without opposition. In the DRC, suspicion and militia turned into hotspots of conflict where it was very difficult to contain the virus. Efforts at responding were sidetracked by armed militias, and clinic attacks became gruesomely routine. Suspicion was widespread among most communities. The public assumed that Ebola was being utilized as a political agenda or that the hospitals were harvesting organs. In one of the villages, the relatives of the ill hid them from the health teams instead of reporting them because they were afraid that the health teams would kidnap them and never retain them again. In the real world, the fears were not quite baseless. Most of the patients actually disappeared into isolation rooms, occasionally without other people, without explanation or closure for their families. These cultural and ethical concerns revealed a stark reality. It's not all science and medicine in fighting Ebola. It's communication, trust, and community. Hazmat-suited doctors don't possess an air of authority if the population remains unaware of what they are doing. So, along with remedies and vaccines, there was a new type of tool: community outreach. Survivors started to talk to the wider public. Radio stations ran 24/7 to debunk rumors, and community leaders were equipped to mobilize and reassure communities. To this end, Ebola still doesn't have a one-size-fits-all solution, but we're much better equipped. Surveillance platforms are stronger. Cross-border cooperation is stronger. World Health Organization and African CDC have improved their playbooks. But these advantages can easily be lost if we're not stayed vigilant. Health systems in the majority of most vulnerable countries remain unstrong, underfinanced, and under-equipped. When the spotlight of the media fades, so does international urgency. What Ebola teaches us, once more, again and again, is that we cannot wait. Viruses do not arrive on visas. What begins in a far-off village can sweep to the world in weeks. We'll learn that in the coronavirus pandemic as well. But the Ebola narrative has a lesson of hope as well. It shows us that science, courage, and human solidarity can overcome even the most dreaded threat. It shows us that hearing from communities is as valuable as having high-tech labs. And it reminds us that the next epidemic is always an A-plane ride away. But so too is the cure, if we are willing to come together and do something about it. The Ebola tale is not a virus tale. It's a mirror. It mirrors us and how we treat the weak, how we learn, and how far we'll go, not to save ourselves, but to save each other.